Well, hey there, I'm going to show you a few photos and I'd love for you to raise your hand if you're a fan. Okay, first of all, spring flowers, some tulips and daffodils. Okay, amazing. Second, roll up the rim coffee season from Tim Hortons. Any fans? Okay, and then my personal favorite, you should all have two hands here, Cadbury mini eggs. Now, when I was growing up, spring flowers, roll up the rims at Tim Hortons, and Cadbury mini eggs at the stores had a way of letting me know that we were in the season of Lent, that we were in the season leading up to Easter. And these weeks leading up to Easter are intended to guide and prepare our hearts for the significance of what's coming up, the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Now, often in this season of spiritual preparation, we associate Lent with giving something up. Maybe it's chocolate or social media or caffeine or shopping. Giving up as a way of following Christ's example of sacrifice. The point, though, isn't just about dropping a bad habit. It's actually about becoming more like Jesus through spiritual growth and reflection and repentance. Giving up something in order to gain the life that Jesus has for us. And so this Lent, as a community, we're asking the question with that focus. Not just what would we give up for Lent that we would want to give up, but more specifically, what would we give up for Jesus and for the life of love that he calls us to, especially in our relationships with one another. What would we give up not for us, but for love? And to help us to consider that, we're looking at what is the most important thing that we need to give up if we're going to experience the life of love that Jesus has for us in our relationships with one another. And we're anchoring this series in the Apostle Paul's letter to the Ephesians, where in Ephesians 4:1, he writes this: "Live a life worthy of your calling." Now, throughout this Lent series, we're talking specifically about our calling to follow Jesus in his life of love. We'll be looking at many things in Ephesians chapter 4 and 5 that Paul says we need to give up in order to live out this calling and grow in Jesus' love together. And for today, our key verse is Ephesians 5:21, which reads, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." Now, I know that the word submit can be a loaded word, so let me unpack what Paul means here. The Greek word translated as submit is hypotasso, which is a compound word, hypo meaning under, and tasso meaning to arrange or to order. Literally, it means to arrange oneself under or to place oneself under in an orderly fashion. It was originally a military term used for soldiers arranging themselves under the authority of a commander. Now, here's what's significant about hypotasso in this context, though. Okay, first of all, it's voluntary. It's not forced. This isn't about being viewed as lesser because of some archaic class system or cultural pecking order. It's about choosing from a place of being deeply grounded in our equality before God to submit to one another. It's a choice, an act of the will. It's something you do because you want to. Second, it's mutual. Paul instructs us to submit to one another. That true voluntary submission in a healthy and loving relationship goes both ways. It's a two-way deal, which is what sets up many of the applications in the verses to follow about how to live out this mutual submission in a variety of relationships, including between spouses, parents and kids, bosses and employees. And in all of these relational dynamics, mutuality is essential. And third, it's motivated by reverence for Christ. By reverence, Paul means an awareness of who God is, deep respect, a sense of awe. And so when Paul says submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, he's essentially saying, let your awareness of who Christ is and his love for you deepen your love for others and motivate you to put others first. That your vertical relationship with Christ is intended to flow out into your horizontal relationships with people. And this is why submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ is the very starting point for this whole series. Because the first thing that we need to give up if we're going to experience the life of love that Jesus calls us to is to give up our natural instinct to put ourselves first. We need to give up our self-centeredness. We need to give up our sense of entitlement. Now, let's be honest. We naturally think of ourselves most of the time, don't we? I mean, for me, I think it begins the very moment I wake up. I find myself asking, what time is it? What's the weather like? What do I need to eat? I need coffee. What's on my list today? What are my deadlines? What errands do I need to run? And without even realizing it, immediately I am seeing the world through the lens of my social location, from my point of privilege. All the while, I am observing what I like, what I prefer, what I need, what fills my cup, noticing what I'm feeling. Yet, when it comes to following Jesus, Paul says that our default needs to be one of submission to others, giving up our natural self-centeredness in favor of having another's centeredness. We may not think of ourselves as self-centered, but consider some examples of ways that we put ourselves ahead of others, which is the very opposite of submission. You know, maybe it's talking over others, dominating a conversation, or redirecting a conversation back to you. Maybe it's dismissing the concerns of others, dismissing the feelings of others. Maybe it's cutting in line at the store or in traffic. Maybe it's giving the silent treatment to someone as a way of punishing them and sending them a message. Maybe it's refusing to apologize or admit when you've hurt someone. Maybe it's always needing to be right in disagreements. Maybe it's assuming that your needs, that my needs, should take priority over others, or speaking about others in a way that's destructive or harmful. Maybe it's avoiding hard, honest truth because, let's face it, it's so uncomfortable. Or maybe it's choosing to hold a grudge or refusing to resolve conflicts. Philippians 2:3-4 says it this way: "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others." How many things are we to do out of selfish ambition? No things, nothing. And why? Because, friends, this is what Jesus' love looks like. In Philippians 2:5-8, Paul goes on to describe how Jesus himself didn't grasp at equality with God, but humbly gave himself up, taking the form of a servant on the cross. Or consider 1 Corinthians 13:4-5. Love does not envy or boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, and is not self-seeking. Are you noticing the theme here? Love refuses to treat people as less than. Jewish theologian Martin Buber talked about the concept of I-it, which is about relating to people as objects, focusing on what it does for us. And this I-it tendency keeps us relating to people as something to be used. In contrast, what he calls the I-thou concept is the idea that when we stop treating ourselves and each other as objects, it's then that we experience the sacredness in the other. It's then that we really see the other and can be present with one another. Everyone is worthy of God's love simply because they exist, and that includes you and me. Self-sacrificing, others-oriented love means that we don't dehumanize people. It means that how we speak about others matters. How we treat other people matters deeply. because each person that we encounter is made in the image of God. And why are we called to this submissive others-centeredness? Because our self-centeredness actually gets in the way of a life of love. It negatively impacts our relationship with God, with others, even ourselves. And we want to live lives that are healthy, lives of love, relationships that are flourishing, relationships that are overflowing with love. And the reality is, love cannot flow freely where there is self-centeredness. The entire gospel is rooted in the concept of grace. Grace offers us what cannot be earned and what isn't deserved. It's simply given. So when we live lives with a self-centered sense of entitlement, our self-centeredness gets in the way of love. And the I deserve sense of entitlement actually, get this, stifles grace. Now, can I also say that the next generation is watching us, and if faith is more caught than it is taught, then living a life of love matters and has impact beyond our lives. Now, as a disclaimer, here is what I am not talking about today. I'm not talking about betraying yourself for the sake of another. I'm certainly not condoning abuse, and I'm not talking about neglecting to care for yourself, not one bit. Your needs, your feelings, and your well-being matter because you are worthy of love. You are beloved and made in the image of God. And it's from that deep place of belovedness that you and I can decenter ourselves and center ourselves around loving God and loving others. Following Jesus means that we are giving up our self-centeredness in place of another's orientation in order to gain the life of love that Jesus calls us to. Now, in my chaplaincy work, I've spent quite a bit of time with people at the end of their lives in their final days and hours, and I honestly find these moments so sacred, so telling. And being up close to death has actually made me acutely aware of what matters, and it's changed how I live. And there's this pattern that I've noticed. Without fail, the last days and hours of life are a time of reflection. And I've noticed that it's not income or success or professional identity that people want to talk about. It's only love. It's only who did I love and who loved me. I mean, on our deathbed, will we still care about the arguments that we won or all the times that we proved to others how right we were or how entitled we are? Spoiler alert, we will not. It was only ever about relationship, about connection. It was only ever always about love. And so how do we start giving up our instinct towards self-centeredness to gain another's orientation and grow in the love that we truly desire? I think there are 5 ways. First of all is through awareness and reflection. There's a quote that I love by a psychologist, professor, and bodywork practitioner named Alan Fogel. And he explains that awareness is medicine. We grow not through trying harder, but through awareness. And so in that spirit, let's ask ourselves, what is behind our selfishness? Let's get curious about that. And when we see selfishness in another that upsets us, maybe it's a mirror for us to look within. What is beneath our resistance to submission, to laying our lives down? Are there stories that we're telling ourselves that may be incomplete or inaccurate about others? Sometimes we are self-absorbed and not even aware of it, and conversations like this can awaken us. Sometimes when we're hurtful towards others, there's actually a part of us that's hurting, and it's easier to project our hurt onto others than to look inward. You may have heard the saying, hurt people hurt people. And so perhaps the invitation is to begin to share with a trusted and safe person what's going on in your life so that you can experience healing and then be able to offer healing and not hurt to the world. Second would be spiritual practices. How can we deepen our alignment with love, with Jesus? Can it be through prayer, through scripture, silence, journaling, worship, through practices that remove us from focusing on ourselves and help us focus on God and others? And the more that we steep ourselves in Jesus and the good news, the more that we're reminded of the fundamental dynamics of grace, focusing in on who Jesus is and what he's done for us, frees us from any and all sense of entitlement. The third is community. I mean, it's really tough to do this alone. The reality is we need each other on this journey. And so the question is, what supports us? Is it life groups, spiritual friendship, therapy? Safe relationships create the space where we can grow and experience transformation. The reality is we become like the people we bond with. Neuroscience shows us that our closest relationships literally shape our brains. They influence our emotional responses, our decision-making patterns, and our daily behaviors. And over time, the people whom we attach to rewire who we become. And so the people that you include in your circle of safety have a profound impact on your life. And so how can we work together to support one another in letting go of our stubbornness, our entitlement, our need to be right? How can we nudge each other gently and not so gently toward releasing our grip so that we might live a life of love, a relational life of fullness that embodies the love of Jesus? Who in your life will show you that and lovingly and courageously speak into that? And in whom will you speak that way? We are all so interconnected with each other. I mean, my well-being is tied to your well-being and yours to mine. We do not exist in isolation. My liberation depends on your liberation and yours depends on mine. To love God is to love you, and to love you is to love God. We are all so interconnected. The fourth is picture what's possible. Now, has anyone read the book, The Correspondent by Virginia Evans? I just finished this novel a few weeks ago. And friends, I need to tell you, it was the kind of book I did not want to put down. The main character in this book, Sybil, she steps into this new level of self-awareness and reflection at the end of her life, and it's beautiful. She shifts from a posture of self-protection to one of genuine connection by embracing her vulnerability, by expanding her small world, and by choosing genuine relationship. She engages in the spiritual practice of writing, and she slowly begins to allow people in. And all of this brought her to a place of transformation as she loosens her grip on her stubbornness and self-absorption, which were really just forms of self-protection. And she does it all for the sake of relationship. And it's through the process of letter writing, facing her failing eyesight, letters from someone in her past, the act of forgiveness, healing her relationship with her daughter, and increased self-awareness that Sybil begins looking at her life differently. And at the end of her life, she reflects on the fullness that she's living in when it comes to relationship. Fullness because of the choice that she made to relinquish her self-centeredness. And I was so moved by this book. And it makes me wonder, how much more so might this be true in a Jesus-centered community? What is possible? And then the fifth is grace, not shame. Friends, this is not about shame. This conversation is about grace and possibility. Because grace is more than abandoning a sense of entitlement. Grace is about basking in the love that Jesus provides, that Jesus has for us. And so in that spirit, what if we showed up differently in spaces where previously we have been self-oriented? I mean, it's never too late to change the script. We can create and cultivate corrective experiences. We can make different choices where previously we have chosen what serves us. We can show up differently. We can even, get this, surprise the people around us. Rather than double down in stubbornness, let's together imagine what is possible. Let's imagine that when we mess up, we could catch ourselves, we could own it, repair, and change course. So much is possible. And it's in these very early days in this season of Lent that you and I have the opportunity to do some reflection, some inventory, to honestly ask ourselves, or to maybe ask the people close to us, would other people say, that we try to put them first? Would other people describe you as submissive? Or do they describe us as usually trying to get our way? Do the people around us at home, at work, in our circles feel loved by us? Do they feel safe or on edge with us? Do they trust us? Do they believe that I am for them, that we are for them? Do they know that I won't betray their confidence when they're out of the room? Do they experience ease around me? Or is it judgment and harsh humor? Do the people around you and I experience love when they are in our presence? These are the questions to ask. Others-oriented love is the way of Jesus. We can study scripture and pray and gather on Sundays, and it's so beautiful, but if it doesn't translate into love, it's just a clanging gong. The whole point is love. That's why Jesus came and died. And friends, this is what you and I are invited into. And so as we close, I wonder, what step are we being invited to take to give up self-centeredness? What sense of entitlement do we need to relinquish as we begin this season of Lent? Lately, I've noticed how often I and we love to talk about church. And it comes from a really curious place and a good place, but it often goes something like, what does the church think about this? And why doesn't the church do more of this? And what I've been reflecting on lately is that it's actually much easier in some ways to talk about the church than it is to talk about my own personal relationship with Jesus, about living a life of love. And friends, I've been reflecting that when we talk about the church, it's really you and me. It's us in this room with these people following Jesus together. And so I think the only question for me these days is, how are we doing at growing in love? That's it. Full stop. With God, with each other, with ourselves. And in order to grow in love, what is weighing us down? What is getting in the way? What do we need to give up? Let's be really honest about this conversation, because sometimes the dynamics of our self-absorption rob us of experiencing the love of Jesus in our relationships. And so let's name that. Let's do the work of releasing it for the sake of love. 1 Corinthians 13:13 says this: faith, hope, and love remain, these three, and the greatest of these is love. I'm going to invite the band forward, and in each of your locations, we're going to respond to this invitation as we participate together in a spiritual practice. Scott Erickson has an art piece called Start with the First Step, inspired by a poem by David Whyte, which reads, "Start with letting yourself be seen. The very thing you grasp tightly to that makes you stand with fists to the world. There is no other place that love wants to meet you. Start with the first step, the one you don't want to take." So friends, let's take a moment to personally check in. How are we doing in our journey to grow in love? With God, with each other, with ourselves. In our journey, what is getting in the way? What do we need to give up? Can we take that first step individually and collectively and release it? Release it. Why? Release it because it's getting in the way of a life of love, a life of mutuality, where love flows and abounds, and where relationships can heal and grow and flourish. And so I want to invite you to close your eyes and imagine for a moment that your hands are clenched in a fist, And if it's helpful, maybe put your hands into a fist and ask yourself, in which ways are you holding on to self-centeredness, to stubbornness, to the need to be right? What are you holding on to that is getting in the way of living a life of love? And then pause and imagine that you are letting it go. If your hand is clenched in a fist, maybe you release it. And as you let go, imagine that you are opening your hands to love. Let's do that together to allow ourselves to be open to receive and to give life, to give love, to live in the flow of that love. Love, friends, is the only thing that matters. Faith, hope, and love remain. And the greatest of these is love.